6:02, I think we'll get started. We may still have some folks joining us over the next few minutes, and that's okay. So first of all, just thank you so much for everyone being here. Especially thank you to those who've submitted letters of interest in submitting a proposal. Really, tonight's goal is to hear just a little bit more about where your thinking is, to see if there's any partnerships that develop as people may have similar trains of thought. For us to help you understand a little bit more about the tools that we've already put out, and really for us to learn about other ways we might be able to help support you in this work. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your interest in this work. It's really, really important work, as you all know, and really hard work. So thanks for being a part of it and staying in the conversation with us. So I want to share my screen for a minute. I'll walk through the agenda for tonight. And then we can dive right in. So for those that don't know me, while I'm sharing my screen here, my name is Patrick Green. I'm superintendent for MAUSD. And Floyd, if you can take a minute to introduce yourself as another support person to the group here, that would be helpful.
Sure, thanks. I'm Floyd Davison. I'm the business manager here at Mount Abe. I'm looking forward to chatting with you all tonight.
So hopefully you can see this, the sort of brief agenda here. And you all are frozen, which means I'm probably frozen. All right, am I unfrozen now? All right, sorry about that.
Good.
So just sort of an outline of what we hope to do tonight. Obviously, just again, that welcome and introduction. But I want to give everyone a chance tonight that has submitted a letter of interest to share just a minute or so about who they are, where their thinking is, just to kind of ground us all, and people may start making connections from that. Then I wanted to kind of go through the educational resources that were provided, and kind of share that ends and educational outcomes lens that is so important to this work before we get into the financial information and the financial tools that Floyd's going to walk everyone through. Then I think it's really important to give you all an opportunity to ask questions about those resources to make sure that you understand what they are and are able to utilize those to their fullest. And then it's really important to think about what, and to hear from you about what other information beyond what's provided would be helpful as you're considering your proposals and doing that work. And then lastly, really just in what other ways can we help support the work that you're doing? Really, I think where we all agree is in the end, we want to make sure that whatever decision is made, that it's focused on outcomes for students, and that it's something that we believe is going to best serve them in the future for the long term. And really just interested in the conversation that happens as we engage in tonight's agenda and the back and forth as we work together to figure this out. Any questions about the agenda tonight? Which brings me to another good point. If you have questions tonight, what will be really helpful with multiple screens is if you can use the electronic hand raise function, because that's going to bring you to the front screen and reduce the chance of missing those hands that go up, especially when we're in screen sharing mode. That'll be really important because we can only see a few faces at a time while we're sharing screens. So with that, I can stop sharing my screen. And I want to take a few minutes to turn it over to introductions, and I'm going to focus on the folks that have submitted proposals. And then we can open it up from there if there are others that didn't get a chance to send their written interest, that have some thoughts to share. But I know we have I think 12 folks that have submitted letters. So I want to start there. And so again, I'll call a name based on the email that was sent. There may be, that person may represent a group, and that's fine. And you can invite other members of your team to introduce themselves as well. But just an opportunity to hear who's in the audience and who helped or who submitted a letter to get things started. So about a minute to introduce yourself and just share really broad strokes where your thinking is in terms of your proposal to see if there's any connections that might be formed tonight as we're hearing what everyone else is doing. So Jim Warnock, MAUSD Reimagined. Can you get us started?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thank you and Don and the board for pulling this all together. I'm Jim Warnock. I live in Lincoln and have been working with a committed group of community members in Lincoln, Moncton, Starksboro, New Haven, and Bristol since last November. We've been continuing to meet on a regular basis, working in subcommittees. And at this stage, we are in need of, and we're looking forward tonight to hearing Floyd share the financial tool. We're reticent to put a wrap on our proposal until we're assured that it's going to be fiscally viable. And so we have fashioned some questions. We have some 7 questions that we've committed to a document, which I can send to you and to the board members. And a speedy response to those would be tremendous in helping us to meet the May 4th deadline. We're very, very aware of the board's interest in having a proposal or proposals that really address the MAUSD ends policy that will ensure successful student outcomes, and that will also be in the best interests of the 5-town district and fiscally viable. So we're looking forward to the support we think you guys can provide us. And I think this is very, very timely tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing what else is percolating from other folks. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Jim. Cheryl Mitchell, Trelevin, I don't know if I pronounced that right, so correct me if I'm wrong, Inc. and Early Care and Learning Partnership, Inc., sort of representing a couple of organizations, right?
Yes, and I thank you again for pulling this together, you and Don and everybody else. So I've been working for maybe 2 years with a group of people that are saying, what are there ways that we can transform our small schools so that they become more community care and learning centers, and have just been involved in wonderful discussions with Nancy Cornell and Herb Olson from Starksboro, and then the large pile of people from Lincoln, and there's probably 150 people in New Haven. We're all trying to figure out, is there a way to do this that meets all your end statements and it's financially viable? And I would say that we've been working with also the 2 others school districts, so Addison Central and Addison Northwest as well, to say, could there be a countywide solution to some of these problems? And we've just gotten support from the select board in New Haven to apply for a planning grant that would really do some deeper assessment about what could this look like? How could we reuse some of these facilities that might otherwise not work as well for us? And my interest, as you know, is in really supporting families while their kids are very young, so that by the time they get to school, they're going to be doing well.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Herb Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I submitted a letter of intent. Nancy Cornell is my henchwoman here. I wanted to also say, though, that Patrick, there's a lot of folks who have been communicating with each other over the past few months. Nancy and I have been in touch with Jim Warnock's group, and we're participating in that. Been in touch a little bit with Coco Mosley. Cheryl, we've had a lot of discussions, and the point, I guess, Patrick, is that a lot of the folks that you're going to be hearing from have already had a lot of conversations with each other, and have already been collaborating around how to get this situation resolved, and we hope that we'll be able to do that. As Jim said himself, it's difficult to pull together a proposal with the financial specificity that that the district and the board appears to want. I'm not going to revisit past stuff, but anyway, I too have some questions that would be helpful in terms of putting together a proposal. And I hope to be able to share that. And thanks for having us here.
Great, thanks, Herb. Karen Looters.
Hi, everyone. I wasn't aware that I had submitted a letter of intent. I did write a letter to the board reminding them of the breadth and the gravity of the situation. I want to empower the board to act fully and appropriately. And if any consultant is to be hired, that they realize that consultant works for them. I do come from a place of connecting with people in all 5 towns and have discussed with many people the value and the importance of the local elementary school and how well it is presently serving the children in our district and getting them off to a good start and having that as a starting point value. And to look at the whole situation comprehensively, carefully, with good information, with fiscal transparency, which at times still has not been forthcoming. I consider myself aligned with many of the folks who have submitted proposals. And I guess I come from a strong place of objecting to the one and only proposal that's been presented thus far. I find it does not serve the community well on almost every level. So my engagement is as a parent of 3 children that have been through every level of the system and of passionate and caring involvement. And I'm willing to work hard to come up with the best solution for this community, solving our own problems without relying on consultants from Connecticut or Massachusetts or even Burlington, Vermont. With that, I think we can gather information and solve our own problem equitably, fiscally responsibly. And I think we can get it right. So that's the core of my involvement. I don't have any particular proposal. I think there are a number of viable proposals and I could see myself supporting a number of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Renee McGinnis.
Am I on?
Yes.
Am I on? Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm new to Zoom and I've been paying attention to this issue. My name is Renee. I live in Moncton. So I'm new to Zoom. I don't know how to raise my hand, so you might see me flailing about if I have a question, unless somebody can direct me how to ask a question. But my proposal is, I think it's really important to consider all aspects, all proposals. So we know, whether people want to look into it or not. I think all proposals need to be looked into and researched. So we're making the best decision. And my proposal is that we investigate the possibility and the cost and benefits and the pros and cons of operating all 5 town schools, grades pre-K through 8, and tuition grades 9 through 12 to some of the area high schools, and closing Mount Abraham, and reducing administrative space and staff. And so that's my proposal. And I'm going to have questions at the end around the work that needs to be done. It's news to me that there's a May 4th deadline. I'm going to have questions around who all is going to be doing this work. There's many people who've reached out to me that have expressed interest in my proposal. But we're not an organized group. I haven't been a part of any community group talking about this right now. So that's probably enough for now.
All right. Thank you, Renee. Patty Heather Lee. Sorry, Patty, we can see you're looking for the unmute button. We'll give you a minute.
I just clicked the wrong button. There you go. I worked by myself. I'm pretty ignorant as to where are all these proposals, and someone along the line has probably said, oh, they're all posted on, but I don't know that. So that is a question. And yes, I don't know how to raise my hand electronically also. Most of my ideas are very similar to Renee's. And my statement in the beginning is expand on early education. I call this front-loading education. I also come up with expand your early education and include through 8th grade in the elementary schools. Do something special with the 7th and 8th graders so that they learn to interact with each other, expand outdoor education. But then I'm left with how, quote unquote, we're supposed to save money, and that's the repurpose Mount Abraham High School, which pains me because I'm a former public school high school teacher. And if that's the case, all those people lose their jobs. So it's extremely painful. I wrote to all my representatives and senators locally to find out about what is the penalty. They haven't gotten back to me if we spend too much money, which to me is a bizarre idea. I think we need choices for students in high school and opening that up to internships. That, we already have the Career Center. Programs like the Walden Project, and also going outside of the district to CVU High School. I'm very concerned that I don't know how the superintendent's office plans to reduce their expenses besides moving, your idea, Patrick, to move into the New Haven School District. So I would love to, your initial proposal, Patrick, I wrote back to the school board saying I wanted think tanks in every 5 town, including students through the realm of community members. And that was not organized. I don't have the power to do that. It was just an idea. But I'm basically left out of all these other groups, but I think we're thinking along, we have some common ground here. And thank you for giving us this opportunity, but I would love to sit with some people virtually, or even wearing my mask, and kick around some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Coco Mosley.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with all of you, and thanks for organizing this. My name is Coco Mosley, and I'm working with Brian Bates. We are both parents in Lincoln, and I also serve the 5-town community as the librarian for Lawrence Memorial in Bristol, and Brian is a family doc at Mountain Health. And we're really interested in, like most of the other folks here, we're developing a assets-driven approach to a solution with a real interest in a community schools model, as well as kind of thinking and pursuing equity for our secondary school students across the county. So, I'm excited to work together and have been working together with lots of folks on the call tonight. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Coco. Josh Crandall.
There we go. Patrick, it's good to see you again. It looks like your beard got longer since I last spoke to you.
Probably whiter too.
Yeah. If you caught me 5 minutes earlier, you would have seen me with a piece of pizza hanging in my mouth. I didn't know I was going to be speaking tonight, so I apologize for the rushed nature of this. Many of you know me. I participated in the community, the facility fees, the facility feasibility group earlier. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I'm sorry, I'm stuttering. So I'm well knowledgeable with the process that has happened so far. And I think we've already discussed some of my priorities in really assessing the assets of Mount Abe and the greater school system, and making sure that we take advantage of the best parts of the system and position ourselves as we go forward and population expands and retain some of these properties. If Catherine's online, she may be able to help me out a little bit. Catherine Lang is a partner of mine up at Freeman French Freeman. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. I'm an architect at Freeman French Freeman in Burlington, Vermont. I'm a Bristol resident. I went to Mount Abe and Moncton Elementary School, so I'm well aware of the school system. And Freeman French Freeman actually has worked on a number of the buildings within the system in the past. So we are ready to hit the ground running to help out, and are well aware of some of the issues. Since we last spoke, Patrick, we've reached out to a national firm who's located in Burlington, who does just this. They work with school boards and educators to really assess from the student level what is the best path forward in making sure that the students get the resources they need, and look at the program from a bottom up approach. So that's a key component of our proposal, is really looking at what the real need is from an education standpoint, looking at the infrastructure that you have and the assets that you have, the community fabric that is already in place, and the importance of the school system, and really looking into the future and taking all of this with a really robust community outreach and collaboration process, and develop a vision for the five-town community. And in all of this being said, the 80 plus years that French Freeman has practiced architecture in Vermont, we have a strong eye towards the future. And Catherine, if I'm putting you on the spot, you have we've talked about this a lot in the past week, and how we see, for instance, the AIA 2030 Vision Challenge and facilities, and how that could be used as a tool to assess how Mount Abe moves forward. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, and maybe a little bit of your experience working with Adam at Rev 2 Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Lang. As Josh said, I'm an architect at Freeman French Freeman in Burlington. And yeah, we do facility assessments, we do planning, and we do architecture, and we've been doing it for a really long time. And before I started working here, I worked at a company.
Josh, could you please disconnect, because it'll be a lot easier to hear. Thank you very much.
Can you all hear me? So before I became an architect, I worked at this company called Two Revolutions. And so I'm familiar with their people and their process, and they're an education design lab. And so they work with districts and states and schools on all different levels to really transform their education system. And they do that by working closely with the administrators and with the educators to implement sort of the future of learning. And they help you define what the future of learning means for you and for your students. But our proposal is really looking at pairing our architecture firm with this education consulting company, so that we can provide a comprehensive solution for your district, your towns, well into the future. And so Freeman French Freeman, as Josh was saying, is a signatory of the AIA's 2030 challenge. So we really focus on providing sustainable solutions. Financial sustainability is obviously a very important aspect of that, and one that we take very seriously as well as the green and environmental aspect.
I think that's it for us. That was a nice wrap. Thank you, Catherine.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Ryan Connors?
Hi, everyone. I'm here also with my coworker, Suzanne. She's the principal. We're with Vazen Studio. We are a design strategy and interior design studio that focuses specifically on educational institutions, both on the K-12 side and higher ed side. And I think Suzanne might be able to touch a little bit more and expand a little bit more on what we do and how we can fit into this puzzle.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. So our thinking on something like this, and based on what we've seen of everything that you have posted online, is similar and resonates with what was just mentioned by Freeman French Freeman. And it begins with the community outreach and stakeholder engagement activities that we kind of have a kind of toolbox of things that we can sort of tailor to the needs of your community. And so I'll say so we're based in Syracuse, New York. So we're not exactly familiar as intimately as you all are with your community. But it is something, it's a process and a way of approaching this level of feasibility or master planning when you're kind of considering, how to move forward. Something that we do with a lot of districts across New York State and into some other neighboring states. And it begins with community and stakeholder engagement, and then understanding sort of the educational strategy behind marrying space and educational strategy and seeing how those best fit together. So conducting building conditions assessments is one piece, but then it's also looking at the educational components and desires and vision for the future, and understanding how they can potentially fit together and sort of thrive in whatever arrangement is determined, and done through a very transparent and a process that's authentic to your community. So we have educational planners on our staff. One is an accredited learning environments planner. So it's somebody who can understand sort of the educational and pedagogical aspects of the school district, and then work with educators to understand the desires that they have and how space can help enhance their work and working with students. And that can look like a lot of the things that some of you have kind of mentioned, like outdoor learning environments, cross ages, cross sort of in collaboration with the community for different outreach and different programming. So these are all different types of things that we can look at. And part of what we do is then to propose, there's a lot of things that you've already kind of considered, and maybe it's kind of another lens to look at some of that and to propose some concreteness around some of those options, so that you have the tools you need to make the best decision for your community. Ryan, do you have anything else to add? I'll kick it back to you.
No, I think that was a good summary. And I think just from what we've heard so far, the community aspect seems very important to this. And that's something that we specialize in, making sure that, not just the educators and students, but the community, their voice is heard, and this we can transform these spaces to make it something that the whole community can be proud of and really take advantage of, and like you said, move education to the future, and looking ahead at what's coming down education wise in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Wanda Bouvier? Don't know if she's on. I don't see her name in the participants list. All right, Brenda Tilburg.
Hi, I'm Brenda Tilburg. I have taught in this school district for quite a while, and this was not the only school district I've taught in. I've been to a lot of these meetings over the past several years at least, and I haven't been discussing with everybody else, but I've been listening. And the reason I put in a proposal is all of the discussion seemed to be about money and buildings and moving students from here to there. But when I looked at the ends policy, I see that it asks us the five-town community, to train the students to become lifelong learners, to work to their personal best, to become responsible and informed citizens. And nowhere, and then I looked at the State Board of Ed things that they are interested in. They're interested in everything from personalization of courses to transferable skills. But again, the main emphasis is not just on money. In fact, none of those mention money anywhere. And I think that what we are doing is perhaps we're coming at it from the wrong end. We need to think about how can one do these very useful and wonderful things that we hope our students will do when they finish graduating grade 12 from Mount Abe. But still keeping an eye on the money. How can one manage the fiscal part of this, but with the main emphasis on the other things that are in the ends policy and are in the goals from the State Board of Education? And my thought is that one needs to work it out so that we keep the schools buildings, well, school buildings as they are, and give each smaller group as much autonomy as possible under the general guidance of the superintendent's office. But that's where I'm coming from, and I'm very interested in hearing what other people have to say.
All right, thank you, Brenda. I didn't see his name on the list, but I'm going to give John Dunham a chance. Okay. Assuming he's not here, then Brenda, I just want to thank you for that. Although before I segue, there may be some folks that didn't submit a letter of interest that are interested in putting together a proposal, and I want to just give a moment for those folks to have an opportunity to share their thinking. Okay. Hearing none, I think I will take that transition then. Oh, Herb, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. You know, it's been really great to hear from other folks. I'm wondering if it might be helpful, Patrick, if you could share the letters of intent that various folks have submitted to you guys, and perhaps email address, you know, if folks are okay with that, so that we can, you know, touch bases offline.
Absolutely. Is there anyone who's not okay with me sharing the email address? My thinking is I was sent electronic copies of all of these. I think Don has them as well. So I would just forward those electronic copies on to the group. And that includes email addresses as well as any brief description of their thinking at the moment. So just let me know if someone has an objection to that.
But what do you mean by the group? Just the
Huh?
people who wrote the ideas?
Exactly. So the folks that have submitted letters that are
Thank you.
intending to work on this, just to that group. So if there's any networking that folks wanted to do, that would help facilitate that. Erin?
Yeah, I was just a little housekeeping. I heard two people say they didn't know how to raise their hands, and I was just gonna instruct, if you go down to the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and click on that, you can raise your hand.
And you might not see the reactions button until you hover down toward the bottom of your screen. It'll pop up for you. Thank you for that, Erin.
Yeah.
Coco?
Hi, yes, I may have missed this because there was some feedback, but were there proposals submitted that were written by folks who don't live in the five-town community?
There were.
And are those submitted with a, I guess what I'm asking, are they submitted with a sales pitch?
Well, I think it's curious. I'm not exactly sure myself. I do think so as this went out, a request for proposals has different meanings in different contexts. So there may have been some cross context happening that led to some of the ones we heard. But they were submitted, and rather than weed things out prematurely, I thought it was important to hear from everyone.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted some clarity about that. Appreciate it.
So segueing from Brenda's comments, I want to jump in. I'll share my screen again briefly here. Because I think, Brenda, you were spot on, and it's something that I think is really important as we engage in this process. To remember that the goal isn't sharing or saving costs, right? The goal really is outcomes for students, improving outcomes and opportunities for our students. That is, as an educational organization, that is what drives us. That is what's written into our ends policy. It really is about doing what is best for our students as defined in the ends policy. That's why I think it's important to have that link there. It would be really important for everyone who's submitting a proposal to read those ends policies so that we know what we're really driving toward. The financial realities, for sure, are something we have to work with. That is our reality, and that's what makes this challenging. If we had no financial hurdles to overcome, and it was just a matter of focusing on the educational piece, this would be a much different kind of conversation. However, the goal really is on student outcomes. It's also important, I thought, to have a link to our strategic plan, which, as superintendent, I'm charged by the board to achieve the ends that they've laid out. That's my job, and I'm held to that by policy. And the strategic plan that we spent 3 years developing with dozens and dozens of community members involved in that work is the plan that we have in place to achieve those ends. So those two items in tandem are really important for everyone to understand as this work goes forward. There are a number of other, I think, really useful documents here. The next one I'll sort of point to, it's not in this order, but the community values that have been produced by our five-town community. So for those of you that maybe haven't been engaged in this since the very beginning, the MAUSD board started this work a year and a half ago, probably. And there's been a great deal of community engagement up to this point. And one of the most driving documents or artifacts that have been produced from that work are the community values, and really starting from that as a foundation. So another really key document to understand. There was some effort to prioritize those community values through a survey that was done. So what you see is a prioritized community values list. There are a couple of different ways you could look at how that would be prioritized. This is one way. It sort of speaks to how it was prioritized. But nevertheless, those are the community values that our community has established. The rest are just really useful documents that speak to strategies in education, systems that are important for developing learners, et cetera, and I think are potentially really useful resources for everyone, again, as we're focused on educational outcomes as we work with the economic realities that we may face, which understandably are an ever-moving target. That's what makes this so challenging as well, as there are a lot of moving pieces. So my main point here is, I won't go through every one of these documents. I think they mostly speak for themselves. I'm happy to answer questions about them. But my main point here is remembering that this is about education first, as Brenda was saying, and working within the realities we have to do the best we can for our students. So with that, I want to turn it over to Floyd to walk through the financial tools and information that he's put together for everyone. And then we'll turn it over to questions about both the educational resources and the financial tools. So
Thanks,
Floyd.
Patrick. I'm seeing Herb's got his hand up. I'm not sure if he has a question or that's a holdover.
That was a holdover.
Thank you. Good. We've got a spreadsheet that was available to the community. I'm hoping most of you got a look at it. It's got a lot of information in it, a lot of information not in it. And that's where we'd like a little bit of conversation this evening to determine what best to include. I'm seeing Steve Rooney's got his hand up. Patrick, if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that all of that information, Patrick, I think you had on that list is on the MAUSD.org website.
It's the proposal.
Yep.
Hello?
Yep, you're there, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, just so if folks are looking for that information you just shared, that it's on the MAUSD.org website under the board tab under facilities planning.
And it should have been linked in the call for proposals as well.
Okay.
So back to me. There's a number of pages in this spreadsheet. We're going to look at them. I'm going to move fairly fast in the interest of time, but I'm open to questions and clarifying requests as we go through it. I'm going to share my screen, which gets us to here. Are you with me? Somebody give me a thumbs up. No? All right.
I think we're seeing page 2 right now, Floyd.
Yeah, right now we are seeing page 2, and I'm gonna back us up to page 1, which is just kind of an overview of the spreadsheet, and it just talks about what these pages are. Before we go to page 2, I want to bring us all the way out to the 21-22 budget tab, because I think it's really important that we recognize where these numbers come from, how they roll up. This gives us an opportunity to look at what our actuals were for a couple of years, 19 and 20, what we budgeted for 20, budgeted for 21, budgeted for 22, that change, and what that reflects as a percentage. This is all the information that we used going through our budget building process. It's in our annual report. This isn't new information in any manner, but it does tie back to, now we'll go back to page 1, this top line of numbers, which is our expenses. This 31,753,310 ties to the total expenses in our budget that we just passed, the community just passed. So it's important to recognize that this number is driven by all those expenses that are in there. Now, how do you use this sheet? there's a number of different ways, and we got a number of different requests and suggestions, and we tried to find a way forward that allowed for as many different individuals and groups to be able to manipulate the same spreadsheet. And where we started was these numbers that drive the budget are driven by the numbers behind it, the increases we anticipate. We had to make some assumptions. One of the assumptions we made in this proposal going forward with the colored headings is that if we don't lose any of our staff members or cut any programs and keep all of our facilities open, what does that translate to in terms of an annual increase? And the driver of that is largely driven by our staffing. So if I'm over here in this T section, we're representing a 3.377% increase in all of our staffing costs if we keep everyone. That includes a wage, it includes Social Security, workman's comp, those type of items. Next is medical insurance, which is another large driver. And also politically, there's conversation about that. And do we leave that increase in? Do we take it out? And that question was pushed forward to us quite often. Other costs, we're assuming a 2% inflation rate. Any of these numbers, you can place your number in. If we're going to go with no increase in salaries, you can put a 0 in there. And if we look at fiscal year 31, it's currently 46 million. With no salary increases during that time, it will flatten it out to 37 million. So it's about giving our best guess out there so that anyone can manipulate these numbers based on what they believe. Because it's really important as you work forward, that driving number of top line expenses sugars down through to give us a cost per pupil. That cost per pupil is what drives whether or not we're in a tax penalty position with our property taxes. Our consistent board direction has been, don't go over the threshold. We don't want to incur those penalties. As you can see by line 20 or line 21, excuse me, those numbers get to significant deficits if we keep all of our expenses, all of our programs, all of our team intact. So the piece that I think is most important for anyone working on the budget is the working backwards from zeroing this line out so that we're not seeing a penalty in our taxation and how that drives your top line number of expenditures. Then you can go into staffing and look at how to build the staff around that number based on average staff costs. We kept it really simple. We did that purposefully. And we can be significantly more in detail. The concern is in a small organization like we are, it becomes identifiable. And identifiable is concerning. We have some issues with that from a legal standpoint with personal identifying information. All right, so back to this page 2. What else can you do with it? We flatlined our revenue projection. It's historically been up, down. We're moving towards and have been trying to get to a point where we're not using fund balance carryover to pay down our taxes in the current year. So from a fiscal standpoint, it's a good position to be in to try and flatline that. Equalized pupil. We've taken the NASDAQ study, pushed it out to fiscal year 30 with the anticipated number of enrolled students, plugged that into the formula that the state uses to give us an equalized pupil number. And in doing that, in the year 30, we project we'll have 1,228.87 equalized pupils. There's arguments that we're going to have more students then. And the one thing I guarantee you, when we're out looking at fiscal year 30, these numbers are all wrong. You know, that we're making the best guess we possibly can, but they do move around. So if you were, for example, wanted to say, I want 1,500 students at that point, putting that in changes your projections, changes what your numbers are going to be in terms of your spending per pupil. We anticipate at some point a weighting study impact, meaning that the equalized pupil weighting will change from what we're using currently for formulas. We don't know if it's going to be rolled out where it's a 1-year hit, a 2-year hit, and then I used an 8-year hit as well. I think somebody's got a question. I'm going to pause for a second and let them jump in. Andrew, was that you?
Yeah, I can jump in for a minute. I just equalized pupils. As recently as the 2.9 presentation that Patrick gave on the K through 8 modeling, the equalized pupil count being used was 1238 in FY26, and our group spent a lot of time looking at FY26 because the December repurposing proposal was using 1238 in FY26, so it's a sort of a landmark for us. But we're seeing in this most recent data, we're all the way up to over 1,300. So I'm just wondering what the difference is there. It's an increase of 104.
That's a great question. I'll answer it this way. Let's go back to the projected 1228.87. And the numbers we were using in December, we were anticipating a weighting study impact of 7.7%. And if I plug that into a 1-year, nope. Sorry. And I've changed that. So using that 7.7, all of a sudden those numbers in 26 become 1343, which is a little closer to the number you were looking at. Nope, it didn't. Let's go.
Round it up.
It didn't change it.
I think so. Where my mind was going with that, Andrew, was I'm wondering if it's the difference between enrollment projection versus equalized pupil count. Those are two different numbers.
No, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's quite clear that it was the number used at the end to come up with per pupil spending. It was the equalized pupil count.
It absolutely is. And the numbers that were used previous didn't allow for the manipulation of the weighting study. It was assumed that it would be coming forward. So that's what drove those numbers there. This allows you to determine what you think the weighting study is going to be and its impact for your proposal. It doesn't mean the numbers that you've been playing with are wrong. It just means that they're not weighted into this spreadsheet at this point. Does that make sense?
It does. I feel a little bit disadvantaged to try and predict what the effect of the weighting study is going to be in FY26, and would be more comfortable if this was providing, guidance and assumptions that we could all use across the board so we could create similar proposals. I guess my question is, if I'm modeling FY26, can I use 1343.48 as an equalized pupil count? Is that a reasonable number to use in a proposal?
I think you're asking a great question and one that's fraught with peril for an answer. If the state determines that they're going to plug in the weighting study in fiscal year 28, we're looking at a fairly large hit to the equalized pupil number because of that.
So let me try asking it another way then. So what was the rationale in the proposal presented in the back on February 9th for the K through 8 for using 1238 as an equalized pupil count? I mean, obviously using a much higher number there would have had a radically different bottom line implication.
Rationale was, at that time, best information we had was the weighting study will go forward. That's still our best information. The design of this spreadsheet is entirely reflective of a request by community members looking to have the ability to insert the number they believe. So we've built that into this spreadsheet. So your number is the one we believe it's going to be. This spreadsheet is an attempt at developing a spreadsheet that gives the ability for you to, for any of our community members to put in their own assumptions.
Okay, I think that's clear. I guess in a follow-up, I don't want to take any more time. I would just appreciate knowing what percent was plugged into the weighting study to come up with the 1238 that was used in the FY26 presentation previously.
7.7%.
Okay, thank you.
There's a whole bunch of questions. Coco, I think you were next.
If anybody has questions more closely related to Andrew's question, feel free to jump in. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, just jumping off of Andrew's question there, and I might, sorry, Andrew, if I'm repeating what you had asked there, but Boyd and Patrick, I mean, if we are going to compare proposals on an even playing field, then we have to consider the same assumptions as far as weighting study, equalized pupils, and those factors. At least that, I guess my question is, that's my opinion. Are you of a different opinion? And I guess a follow-up would be, I don't know how we can compare proposals on an even playing field if we've got different numbers for those assumptions.
Right.
And there's the rub, Nate. I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. We've picked some benchmarks, and that's what we've used for our projections going forward. And we've been requested to allow for the ability to make your own assumptions. So I understand that it's going to create an unequal playing field in the comparisons of these proposals. And about all we can do, or the board can do on the back end once these come in, is to weigh those proposals. If, for example, let's jump off the cliff and say, we project that the threshold is going to allow for a 10% increase annually. And in doing so, our equalized pupil spending is no longer an issue. Well, I would say that if you presented a proposal with a 10% annual increase in the spending threshold, your proposal would be discounted based on that assumption that you're making of a 10%. So reasonable assumptions, I think we can discuss any one of those at any time, and they're all reasonable. Is 7% reasonable for the weighting study? Sure. Is 8% reasonable? Probably. Is 6% reasonable? Probably. Is 0? I would say 0 is not reasonable. Does that make sense? And it's not an attempt to do anything other than reflect back to the requests that we've had in the design of this information error, really.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I appreciate the ability to adjust those things in the spreadsheet, Floyd, and that does make sense. I think my final question would just be, when you're comparing two proposals, and if you're comparing two proposals that differ in the assumptions that they make about the weighted study and the equalized pupils, then I think it makes sense to adjust those things in this spreadsheet. But if you're comparing two proposals that just adjust, where students are and what buildings are open, in my opinion, it would make sense to use the same numbers here. Because to give an example, if you were to say that a proposal for K through 8 did not work, when a proposal for, consolidating students in Bristol did work, but you used different assumptions on weighting study and equalized pupils, I don't think that would be a apples to apples comparison or a fair assessment of both proposals.
I agree with that too, Nate.
And I'll jump with, with this as my response. Patrick and the board are unbelievably clear that it really comes down to what's best for kids. And where people are and how they're serving kids is most likely the driving force. Having said that, assumptions that are way off base in order to drive that are probably not realistic, right? And we can all argue about those details, but again, a 10% increase is not an expected sustainable increase. And the legislature could come in and say it is. And that would drastically change our conversation in a matter of one law. I think we have to go forward based on what the legislature has done, what the historicals have done, and make our best guesses out 6, 7, 8 years.
And that has been really part of the challenge, Nate, is, one approach could have been anyone who's interested in putting together a proposal, you must use these assumptions so that we have the apples to apples. And that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And those would be the assumptions that we drive based on the information we have from what we're seeing in the legislature, what we've seen historically, et cetera. And some community members feel really strongly that our assumptions are wrong and they want to use their own assumptions. So it's trying to walk that line. I think maybe one thing we can do to help with that is put out a document that does share really clearly, these are the assumptions that we believe you should be using as you're building proposals. And some people may choose to stray from that, and I suppose they can, and that will have to be factored in somehow as the board's weighing the different proposals.
And to that point, if you look at this spreadsheet, it shows our assumptions of 0.3377 for an increase in salaries. Our assumptions on the projected equalized pupil is here. Our assumptions on the weighting study is here. Our assumption on the threshold here. So you can see what we've tried to use, and you can use that as a benchmark and adjust it to your thoughts. I think Coco, back to you.
Sure, thanks. And I'm looking at two screens here, so apologize if my eyes are.
I'm looking at 3, so I'm right there with you.
Beat me to it. So I'm just curious a little bit about the narrative behind what I'm looking at on line 4, the percent change from previous year. I see that in FY23, it jumps to 4.2%, 2.6%, and that stays the course going all the way through. Historically, what has been the increase over the last 10 years, and why are we seeing that 4.26% jump stay through FY20, let's see, FY31?
Yeah, that's really as simple as when we don't make reductions in staff or don't reduce programming, historically, we've seen a 4.26% increase in overall spending. And so this assumes not making reductions going forward.
And if you take that, Coco, and go back and look at 21 and 22, that 1.45, 1.13, that reflects reducing staff by, I think, almost 10 in the most recent budget and 13 in the previous budget, along with other cuts to be able to hit those spending thresholds. So going forward, if you're looking at fiscal year 23 with a $1.5 million hole to hit the spending threshold, all things being equal, then I would say that my expectation is the board set a number at the top of expenditures that would drive a zero on over the threshold. So we don't go into a penalty situation. That's historically what they've done. I'm not going to speak for the board. And if they did that in fiscal year 26 or 23, that 4.26 would be reflective of a 1 or less increase in the spending, because the cuts would have to be made in the year 23. It's not static. This picture is static, but it's not static going forward. In the same way, if you were looking at projections a year ago, they would have reflected a 4.26% increase in fiscal year 22's budget. And then we didn't take that. We were able to take advantage of attrition and cutting some items that we thought we could move away from and still serve our students. And that reflected to a 1.13% increase on the top line.
And in fact, the 1 year on the screen that you can see that we didn't make any staffing reductions is FY20, which was a 6.61% increase.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question? And I apologize if this has already been answered, but as we project declining student enrollment, wouldn't we also see less positions filled in the district?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I'll let Herb ask his question. He's always got great insight, so thank you.
Well, I don't know about that. So thanks, Floyd and Patrick, for putting this together. You know, I think a lot of people have a lot of, you know, just sort of clarification questions. You know, I'm looking back at the December 22nd spreadsheet, and, you know, what do those tabs headings mean? Is it okay to just submit those sort of clarifying what the heck does that mean to you guys, so that we don't take up a lot of time here and reserve the time here for maybe some bigger picture questions? Patrick and Floyd?
Yeah, that works fine, sure.
Yeah, so I'll touch on maybe a little bigger picture issue. And I confess, you know, there's a lot of folks on this call that know a lot more about this stuff, financial analysis than I do, that's for sure. But my take of it is that only the cells that are sort of outlined in red can you change. And I see where Floyd, you know, just showed where if you changed one of those assumptions in the red bordered square, it would change a lot of the stuff in terms of expenses and thresholds and whatever in the, you know, the to the left columns. My question is, you know, so folks who are trying to build a different scenario, because your expenses that you laid out there, Floyd, are if you didn't do anything, right? And so if you're trying to build a scenario to change that outcome, you know, you're going to want to make some changes in the expenses, the staffing, you know, a bunch, you know, it's facility staffing, central, you know, a bunch of things, you know, merger, whatever. So maybe I'm just totally ignorant here, Floyd, but can you change those other tabs in terms of, I mean, you got a bunch of good information there, building costs, staffing levels, all that, you know,
I'll answer it this way, Herb.
An ability to change those to fit your scenario.
Sure.
That would then make a change in terms of the over under, in terms of the threshold. And maybe I don't get it, but I don't see it right now.
Well, here, I'll walk you through two different ways you could do that. One, when you download this spreadsheet and it becomes your spreadsheet, not the district spreadsheet, you can go in and change any of these numbers you want. They're not protected. We've set it up on the web protected, because what we don't want is somebody to play with it there and then change what everybody's looking at because Floyd went in and played with it. Having said that, the other thing you can do, and using your example, what if you wanted to reduce your salary line? You're going to take some people out. I put negative 0.4% here, and you can see what that does to the top line and to what your percentage increase is. So if you have a number that you think, okay, I'm going to cut, rather than a 3.377 increase, I'm going to project a 0.4 decrease in the salary line. You can manipulate it that way as well. So either going into the cells directly or going into the formula, whichever you prefer. And there's nothing saying you can't take this spreadsheet and improve it to what you want to do.
Yeah, well, that's going to be beyond me, Floyd, that's for sure. But you're saying that you can modify the expense lines for the future fiscal year, and that would, to account for different scenarios, right?
Yes. Just one point of clarification, though. Floyd said download. I think it's out there as a Google Doc. So what you would do, it's view only right now to protect it so that people can't sort of mess with it and mess it up for everybody else. But you can make a copy of it and you can manipulate any cell in the document.
Any cell. Okay. All right. I'll give it a shot. I'm done for now.
Dave, I see your hand up too. Dave.
Yeah, Dave.
So Floyd, I just wondered if the weighting study and the special ed law are often talked about in tandem at the state level. So I wondered if you have provisions in here for projections on the special ed study.
I would agree that the assumption is that there will be some offsetting revenue, and that's where this box here in T5 would allow you to include that. I think our internal projections have been a $250,000 increase to our revenue line from that. We're showing a net decrease because we're assuming going forward not using fund balance to balance our budget.
Thanks.
Sure. So
right. I think that's Renee who I saw a hand up for.
Yes, I learned to raise my hand. One real quick question about the spreadsheet. Which line is the special needs line here?
From an expense standpoint or from a?
Well, is it line 21, 22? Which line are we? I just for future reference, I was just wanted to get, I'm writing down notes about which line applies to which.
I'm assuming you're talking about Dave's question, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so this T5 is the space for adjusting your revenue up or down.
Right.
And then the expenses for special education would be in line 2 with all other expenses. There are offsetting revenues that come along with special education spending. Those would be in the next line down, line 3, where it shows the revenue. And so that's, you can manipulate those cells once you've made a copy individually, or you can manipulate it by percentage in that T5 cell that Floyd was talking about. So there are a couple of different ways to go about it depending on how you wanted to.
I'm sorry to jump in. So Floyd, you were anticipating a $250,000 revenue increase. Is that included in this spreadsheet, or does someone need to add that to line 3?
We haven't, you'll see that it's not included in the expense line. So we left it as a wash.
I'm sorry, as a wash?
Meaning, well, if you increase your revenue and you increase your expense by the same number, it doesn't change your ed spending number.
Well, I understand that, but aren't you projecting an increase in revenue with no increase in expense with regard to the special ed law?
Well, we can, and we've left this spreadsheet to be done however the community wants to do it. In the same way, we haven't added the weighting study impact to equalized pupil. We've allowed that to be used as a tool by the community, and we wanted that consistency.
And I think perhaps what I think I'm hearing you say, Floyd, maybe I'll try and say it a different way,
Thanks.
is if you look at the cells where it talks about the impact of the weighting study, there's no impact of the weighting study factored into this document currently. That's where those are all zeros. And therefore, so that's sort of a negative impact on the district from a spending perspective. So if we're not going to include the negative impact, it seemed reasonable to not include the benefit of the 250K. If we want to reflect the decrease in
Patrick,
Yep.
Patrick, you might remind people to mute.
Yeah, if you can mute if you're not speaking, please, that would be helpful. And I can try to monitor that as well. I have mute authority, so I'll try to get more on top of that. So yeah, I think, and that was to your point, Dave, they're often spoken about in tandem. So if we're gonna count the benefit of the special education funding change, then we need to be counting the decrease in our equalized pupil that comes along with a weighting study. To pick one or the other probably is misleading. In this case, we didn't pick either.
I get it. It's just it's obvious on the spreadsheet how to manipulate the rollout of the pupil weighting, but it's not obvious with regard to the special ed law. So I just need to keep in mind, or people just need to keep in mind, that if they're going to put the weighting study in place, they might also want to consider putting the special ed $250,000 in the revenue line.
I think it's important to note that this isn't our spreadsheet. This is a spreadsheet designed in the hopes of making it a little bit easier for our community to put numbers to proposals. And that was the goal of this. So when you're looking at this and comparing it to what the district may have presented, or the board has looked at different times in different scenarios, that's not the intent of this spreadsheet. The intent is to try and make it as user friendly as it can be for our community members that want to help us out.
All right, I see Nancy Cornell's hand.
Thanks. This may be a similar question, but you know, at the last board meeting, you were talking about expecting that from a year ago to when the ARP money comes in, you're expecting you believe you're going to get an unexpected revenue of, it looked like $4.9 million. And I'm just wondering how, I know you're waiting to hear what the rules are about that, but you were talking about using chunks of that, significant chunks maybe for facilities pieces that you were going to have to fund some other way. And I just wonder if that has been figured in to this spreadsheet, or whether it somehow could be, because it seems like it's a lot of money that might even buy the board some time in figuring out how to approach the financial issues you're facing.
Yeah, it's a good point. It is a lot of money. That 4.9 million is correct. And it's one-time money, which comes with its own challenges and how it's used. And as you'll probably remember from your days as associate superintendent, Nancy, the supplanting rule sometimes makes that challenging. So we can't take positions that we have historically paid for through the general fund and instead pay for them with this grant fund, because that's against the rules. So we are still learning more about what's allowable and what's not. But that definitely is something that gets in the way and makes it, I guess, less advantageous. And we're trying to really think, because it is one-time money, trying to think really critically about how do we invest that money in a way that strengthens our systems so that when that money does go away, we're better coming out of that than we were going into that, because there are definitely ways that we could utilize those funds that do some good things in the immediate and then leave us further behind when the funds go away, and we're left still to figure things out. So it's still pretty early in the process, but we're thinking really critically about how we use that money without supplanting to focus primarily on helping our students and meet their needs coming out of COVID. Secondarily to that is looking for opportunities to improve facilities, thinking about indoor air quality, general cleanliness, et cetera, things of that nature.
So you don't think it's going to help at all in terms of buying some time?
I don't know that I'd say that quite yet. I think it's not clear yet how much it's going to help buy some time.
Okay.
I think I saw Jim Warnock next and then Steve Rooney.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I'm looking at line 2 for FY22, the 31,753,310. And if I could, if I could share on the screen the graphic that was presented at the at the March 9th meeting with the breakdown of per pupil expenditures for the elementary schools. So can I just put that up there?
I think I just gave you permission to do that, Jim.
Yeah, because it says host disabled. So great. So let me. I
think Floyd has to stop sharing.
Yeah, let me pull that up here.
Do I need to stop share?
Yeah, you probably need to stop, Floyd.
Oh, I'm gone.
Yep. So is it okay? And let me just come back here. Okay, let me pull this up here. Where is it? Hold on a second. Okay, this should work now. Oops. Here we go. Yep. So you all see that? This is what we saw down here. We saw each of the schools, and this was a breakdown of operating costs, facility costs, et cetera. So what you see is the enrollment for each of the elementaries, the school cost and the district cost, and the ensuing cost per pupil. It strikes us that particularly tonight we heard a number of folks express their proposals of shuttering the high school and tuitioning kids out. So I think a kind of a dramatic action like that would certainly warrant a commonly held view of what is the per pupil expenditure for students at the high school. And what we did was, in the absence of any ready access to that information, we took the 12,133,843 down here and subtracted that from the total, which is on line 2 for FY22, and came up with 19,619,467. And if we divide that by the number of students that are enrolled, we come up with a fairly high per pupil expenditure. And I guess A, is this accurate? And then B, how does this project forward in looking at FY26? If we or anyone else were going to be proposing tuitioning students out, it would probably be helpful to know what that per pupil, and I appreciate Floyd's caveats, certainly that there are assumptions in projecting out that far. but are we on track here in terms of looking at for FY22, the per pupil expenditure of
Yeah.
high school?
I guess I can't say obviously exactly the precision with the calculations without looking at it more closely. I think conceptually, yes. And it's actually expected that it costs more to educate a high school student or a secondary student than an elementary student. In fact, in the weighting study, secondary students are weighted more heavily than elementary students. Thinking about co-curricular expenses, career center expenses, those sorts of things that are added costs. So it doesn't surprise me that the cost per pupil at Mount Abe would be in that realm for your calculations there. Another piece that's challenging is in some cases, the class size is smaller at Mount Abe because there comes a point at which when you're reducing staff at the secondary level, you end up reducing programming at the secondary level as well. And so efforts to keep programming robust often can produce smaller class sizes that lead to higher cost per pupil.
Yeah, no, I agree that there's going to be a disparity between elementary and secondary costs. And we see that in the average announced tuition, which would be what would be available to tuition kids out. But the differential is not that dramatic. I think when you're talking about, for instance, Bristol at 15,725, and then you're talking the high school as being not quite double that, but pretty substantial. So we're just trying to get a clear fix on, on some sort of accurate way of looking at the high school per pupil expenditure.
If I might,
And it's hard to, it's difficult to, I'll look at Lincoln at that $29,000 figure. That $29,000 figure was driven with a $99,000 number for transportation for the Lincoln students. I would say that it was just an allocation of our total transportation costs based on the number of students at Lincoln. And Robinson would be, well, let's pick Bristol, the other side. Bristol would have had a $290,000 allocation of transportation. So this is where the cost per pupil doesn't necessarily reflect, it's not a good measuring stick in that the Mount Abe 686 students is carrying $848,000 of the transportation. And I would say that, Jim, we could agree that that's probably a really high allocation for the high school in terms of what the real usage is. Again, it goes back to the cost per pupil isn't where we want to focus. We want to focus on what we can get delivered to our kids. And
I would
allocations can be, we can play with them any way we want.
I'm sorry, Floyd.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'll close out here and create space for other folks. I do agree with you that the per pupil expenditure alone is not a quote unquote fair metric. However, I should advise us all that it has been used rather heavily handed by board members, in fact, as arguing as to why small schools should be closed. So I think we need to be really, really cautious about how we use data that we're not necessarily entirely in agreement on either. So I'll just leave it at that and take my golden hand down.
So I would, having some knowledge about per pupil and counting pupils, I think this whole thing is flawed and should not be used for any reason. Number one, because it's using ADM and not equalized pupils. So at the high school level, for example, 1.3 is a high school pupil with regard to moving from enrollment to equalized pupils. So at the very least, you'd have to multiply that 600 plus number by 1.3. But just doing that is not helpful. you should throw out all those per pupil numbers that have been generated. They are not helpful either politically or financially in evaluating where we should go in the future.
All right. Steve, I saw your
Right.
hand next, and I think I saw Cheryl, then Herb.
Yeah, just to try to go back to something that is helpful. The suggestion that Dave made earlier about maybe having a cell that at least notifies folks about the special ed. It looks like you've got the construction, the potential for Montpelier to adjust the construction part of the budget and the waiting study part of the budget. It seems like it would be helpful to at least list what our assumption is on the special ed law and give folks an ability to adjust for that.
Sure.
Just so they're reminded that it's an option.
I agree, Steve. I made a note of that too.
Yeah, that's an easy add into that revenue line. That's perfect, easy.
All right, Cheryl.
Thanks. These are really small details, but I'm wondering, is there a standard tuition rate for high school kids who are being tuitioned out?
There is. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what.
I don't have it.
But there is a standard tuition rate.
Okay, and that would be, would the families have choice of whichever public school they wanted to tuition their kid into?
Well, and I guess I should clarify, each school sets its tuition rate. So we have a tuition rate that we announce. So those that are tuitioning in would pay that. Virgins has a different tuition rate that it announces. So it's not standard across the state, but there is an announced tuition rate for each school.
So we would have to look up each of the schools in the local area that parents might be interested in.
Right, and we have some of that. I guess we projected out to FY26 and assumed the weighting study basically bumped all, because I did do a more in-depth analysis on the closed Mount Abe and make five schools K-8 and tuition students out. And I can share that out to this group as well. That may be something that folks can look to, because there were several folks that have that idea as an interest. You can take what I've done and run with it or dismiss it, whatever you need to do, but it's there that could be helpful. But we can help with that tuition information. I think, Floyd, you already have that, right? So we have just trying to save you a little homework.
That's great. And I'm also wondering, so if the community schools legislation passes the Senate, could we ostensibly work with the two other school districts in the county and do one countywide application for that, or would that just need to be our Mount Abe district?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question right now. That anytime we have an opportunity to work as a county, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what's allowed or not allowed under what's coming through the legislature right now.
Great, thanks. And I guess I probably missed this, but I thought there was a proposal coming in from the principals, and I wasn't sure whether there was a principal proposal that got spoken about earlier.
Yeah, there has never been planned for a principal proposal to come in. I did engage with the principals around specifically FY23 to start really thinking about that target now that we had FY22 ready to go. So I have collected all the sort of thinking, and we've talked through the different thoughts that building principals had around FY23. And we're still in that conversation. So we're going to be meeting on that again in the near future to continue that.
And would it be okay if you asked them if that could be shared, some of that thinking could be shared?
It's still in process right now, so
okay.
I don't think we don't have anything ready to share out, but we can certainly keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think I saw Renee and then Andrew, and Herb is sorry, no, Herb, you were next. That's not a holdover. Herb, then Renee, then Andrew.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of folks with really good ideas. Just following up a little bit on what Sharon was saying. I hear that you're not ready to disclose anything, but I guess my questions are, when will that be complete? What's the process for that, Patrick? When it'll be completed? And, in terms of folks trying to put together proposals, certainly that information would be very, very helpful. And it would be great if that kind of information was available before we have to submit our proposals. And also just kind of wondering what the budget parameters and staffing parameters that you gave them. Again, it might be helpful, even if you don't have a completed results from that. It would be helpful for us to know what those budget and staffing parameters were. If I can, I'm gonna sort of multiply just to pick up on some things that have already been said, Patrick. I totally share Dave's suggestion that this brouhaha around per pupil cost for the elementary schools is very, very unhelpful and divisive. It has been raised, however, and I think at the last meeting, or maybe it was a couple of meetings ago, Patrick, it was kind of doubled down, that we got to close schools in order for us to be equitable allocation of resources. So we really need, so any proposal, I think, has got to address the equity issue. And in order to do that, I think we really need to know a better breakdown of some of the calculations that you put up there on the PowerPoint in terms of, you had this operating cost associated with a school, unbroken down. I mean, I think we really need to go those subcategories and what amounts are assigned to each facility. Likewise, the costs that are allocated, from the district level down to the elementary school. There's some pretty big categories there, general administration. It would be really helpful to know what the amounts were and how they were allocated. And finally, the big, to me anyway, it might not make any difference, but it would be really good to know some sort of factor around pay grades and steps between the elementary school facilities. And I'm not talking about disclosing individual salaries. I'm just thinking that there might be, people have raised this before and just haven't heard anything. And we're going to have to address that, Patrick, because you said, we got to address equity. And you said that we don't close schools, it's inequitable. So we really need to know some more information around those categories and what the pay grade step factor differences are between the elementary schools. Is that something that you could provide?
I have lots of clarifying questions about what you mean when you say some of those things. Like when you say pay grade step factors, where my mind goes is the salary schedule, which is on our website, which is part of the negotiated agreement. I'm not sure that that's necessarily what you mean. So
no, it's not.
Right. So that's where I think I'd want to understand more about what it is you're asking for specifically so that we could provide.
Well, I don't know what the situation is because don't have the data, but let's just assume for the minute. I mean, if you look at the enrollment data for Beaman and Lincoln and Moncton and Starksboro, they're relatively close, right? But you have these very, very different cost per pupil calculations that you made. And I'm trying to think, why is that? And one of the possibilities, I could be totally wrong, is that maybe you have teachers with greater longevity in Robinson versus Moncton, Lincoln versus Beaman, that might account for at least some of that difference.
It certainly does. Yeah, I think I tried to make that point, I think, in that presentation, that it does absolutely make a difference, right? The top end pay scale for the teacher salary is almost twice what the base salary is. So seniority makes a big difference in the sort of total compensation for an individual. And when those figures were produced, they were produced in a manner that was most consistent as we can now as a unified district to the way they would have been produced when we were separate school districts, just to have, rather than make up some new way to do it, to try and stay as consistent as we could with historical practice. And so it does look at the actual costs of the actual people and the actual buildings, and there are differences for sure. So a more senior staff costs more money and produces a higher cost per pupil. That is true.
I'm just looking to quantify that, Patrick, because again, if the difference in a major factor in the difference in cost per pupil has to do with the contract, I'm not seeing how that's an equity issue that you presented. So, I don't want to argue about, you feel very strongly about that. I'm just looking for some data to help us make a proposal that will address the equity issue that you've raised. And I think what we need in terms of information is some sort of factor that takes into account the relative longevity of teachers in each school.
So average total compensation for a teacher in each school?
No.
Could be a factor. I feel like that would give you the information you're looking for. So we can work on that.
I'm sorry, what would you do, Patrick?
The average total. So if we looked at Lincoln, for example, and looked at the average total compensation of the classroom teachers specifically at Lincoln, that would produce the figure I think that you're looking for. That's the factor. And then we could compare that average total compensation to the average total compensation across other schools, and you can see how that seniority factor was applied to the cost per pupil.
And I'm going to jump in, Patrick, because I think it's important to note that the number in the proposal that Patrick put together was using a district-wide average, because the reality is that if we go forward and there needs to be cuts of some level of staff, it isn't going to be driven by school. It's going to be driven by the contract. So the average isn't really going to be the impactful piece. We could have someone at Bristol who ends up at Lincoln, or someone at Lincoln who ends up at Moncton. So tearing it down on a per school basis clouds the reality of we just want the right staffing for the number of students we have, which would be generated. The simplest and probably fairest is to use that average that Patrick used.
Yeah, so
it takes the seniority out of the conversation, as it should.
So Floyd, I don't disagree with you. But the equity issue has been put forward by the district and the board. So we're not trying to raise that issue, but we have to respond as people that have filed letters of intent. We need to grapple with that, because that Patrick made very, very clear at recent meeting that, as long as he's has superintendent, equity is going to be an issue, and it's not equitable right now because of the cost per pupil issue. So we need to know better data around the expenses and costs associated with those calculations in order to be able to put together a decent, reasonable proposal.
And just to clarify, in case folks didn't see that, my statement meant I'm committed to spending what it takes per pupil, and it's going to be different at different schools, to ensure that what is equitable are the support and services that we provide our students. That to me is what takes priority over equitable spending per student. I couldn't get behind something that says we're going to make sure to spend the same amount per pupil at each building, knowing that produces very different support services and outcomes for our students. We are one district. We are not 5 towns when it comes to MAUSD. We are one district, and we need to make sure that every one of our students is getting an equitable experience and equitable support and services, not focusing on
I'll
equitable.
drop it for now, Patrick, but I disagree with the narrative that you're trying to create here.
Okay. All right, let's move on to Renee.
Okay, I would just, first of all, just a statement. I agree with you, Patrick, that the equity is in the services and in the education, not the cost per pupil. And that doesn't necessarily mean, and this isn't even my proposal, if some schools have to close, that does not mean that the kids who attended the schools that might have to close are not going to get the same high quality education and services that every other student in the district does get. So it is about the quality of the services. The reason why we're here and having this meeting is because we're approaching an unsustainability. It is about the money. And that's why we're having this meeting. We wouldn't, if student population weren't going down, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having a facilities crisis or issue to deal with. Everything would be rolling along smoothly. So that's just a statement. The cost does matter. And it's all these proposals need to be looked at a cost benefit perspective. What are the benefits and what are the costs? And what is the best cost benefit ratio that we can get for our students? All of these proposals needs pros and cons, and anything that there needs to be evidence-based reasons why these proposals, whether it's keeping all 5 town schools open, Mount Abe open or closing it, all of these need to be evidence-based in what's best for the students, their best outcome, best educational, academic outcomes, extracurricular, etc. So my questions are on this whole process, because I just kind of found out about this like a couple of days ago when I was catching up on my email and ran across these, your link, Patrick, in Front Porch Forum and Eugenie Doyle's. So I'm jumping into this kind of late in the game. My questions are, what are the status of like current proposals, like, is closing schools still like on the table, or are we starting at ground zero? That's a question. Is the board still working on any proposals? Or is the board relying on just these community proposals only for now to come up with some proposals for you to look at? I can stop there, and if you want to respond to that first.
I would let the board, there are a number of board members here. I might turn it to Dawn first to respond to the board piece. And my sense is that nothing's off the table right now. I think we're still trying to figure this out. And we've been at it for a while. And we are going to have to make some decisions at some point because in the meantime, decisions are being made for us essentially as we continue to have declining enrollment and funding challenges. But I'll let board members speak for sort of where the board is and where the board's going. Maybe Don will start with you and you can call on others that.
And I have a process question after that too, just to, yeah.
Sure. I think the board is open to, considering what people have to present to us. We're thinking about what we've heard over the last 18 months. We're thinking about what we're hearing now. We're constantly reevaluating and adjusting and trying to be flexible as we look at this. The community engagement committee is going to restart back up because we want to have an open way to hear more voices. I think we are open to considering everything at this point. Krista, or maybe you want to add something?
Sure. Yeah, I think we've recognized through this process that it is iterative. And so, and I just really appreciate that folks have been hanging in there with us, administrators and community members alike, as we kind of work and rework our decision making. And so I don't think we're at ground zero because we've gathered some really great information to date. But we also, are engaging in this work to look to community experts to help guide us. So yeah, so thanks for being part of this conversation. I think tonight's been incredibly helpful.
May I, thank you. Yeah, may I ask my kind of like process
Sure.
question? So like the proposal that I have requires information outside of the financial spreadsheet. I've circled all kinds of things on my proposal that, questions that we would need answers to. I don't have the resources for those. So I'd either have to, I don't know if this is something also that the board, I'm willing to help a little bit, but I also have a lot going on. There's like no way I could meet a May 4th deadline. But there's other information that would be needed to actually pull together this proposal. So are you, Patrick, or members of the board available to provide this information? Do you have it, or can you have it? And yeah, that's it right there. It's kind of a two-parter. Do you have the resources? And if other people that are also interested in my proposal to, all the 5 towns open pre-K through 8, and then tuitioning out to the other schools. I just lost my train of thought. Is that something that school board members, I don't know who all has been pulling together all these proposals in the past, but what I'm saying is I need help, I guess. There's no way to pull this off, even with the other people that I know that are interested in this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift for sure. So I guess my response to that is, yes, we're very interested in helping you in any way that we can. And we haven't added staff members in light of working through these challenges that we face, right? So I say, yes, we want to help. And we have to also make sure that the job of leading the district still happens. So we'll help in any way that we can. And depending on the volume of resources needed and support needed, we'll just have to navigate that and do the best that we can with the resources that we have.
I think it's really important, there's a lot of smart people on the screen tonight, and we've talked about sharing emails. And I would venture to guess that a lot of the questions may be answered by someone else on this group. And rather than Patrick getting 15 questions, maybe 2 are the only ones that he really needs because, Cheryl's already chased something or Coco's already figured this out. And as a group, we can leverage each other.
All right, Andrew, Steve, and then I see your hand, Brenda.
Okay, I actually have 3 questions, but I'm going to keep them brief and hopefully we can move right through them. The cost per school, cost per pupil, and sort of the breakdown by the individual schools. When we had our own budgets prior to 2018, those were in the town reports. And I think each town likes to know what's going on with their school, and it's helpful to know what our own facilities cost is and everything else. And I know as a district, MAUSD hasn't broken that down, and there's been a lot of emails and a lot of pushing, if you will, to sort of get that information out. ACSD, I looked at their annual report and it's great. They have everything broken down by school. It's very transparent. It's all right there. I just think as community members, it's something we're curious about and it's helpful information. Is there any particular reason why it's not presented in the way they do at ACSD, or you have any hope in sharing that in the future?
Yeah, I think it's a philosophical approach. We aren't separate districts any longer. We're a single district with a single budget. And so we're trying to have our annual report reflect that. So I would say it's more philosophical than it is anything else. And that's something that we can certainly consider going forward. I would certainly want the board to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'd just like to see that be considered. I appreciate it philosophically. It's one district, but there's some issues around transparency that I think could be addressed by making that information more available. But I'll just leave it at that. The general administration expenses allocated to the elementary schools, and the same per pupil spending exercise. Each of the schools got a general administration number allocated to them, and this is more intellectual curiosity than anything. When I add those numbers up, I come to $1.79 million. Okay, that's general admin to the elementary schools. And when you look at the FY22 budget, the total general administration number is $92,000 less than that. It's only 1.7. So on my sort of, inexperienced cursory eye look at this, my eye says, what's up, right? We're allocating 92,000 more in GA to the elementary schools than is being carried in the budget. And then furthermore, that doesn't leave any room for any allocation at all of general administration expenses to the middle school, high school, the Mount Abe. So I'm sure there's a perfectly clear explanation. I just was looking for a little insight into that, if I could.
Sure. I don't know if you have that off the top of your head, Floyd. I don't have it.
I'm not sure what numbers you're comparing. There's a lot of them. Are you looking at the board report?
No,
That's
so
in
if
the
you,
annual report for
no, if
general
you look at
administration?
those equalized per pupil spending numbers that were put out, I could pull it up real quick if you don't mind me sharing my screen.
Sure.
Let me just give you permissions to do that as soon as I find my cursor on one of these screens. There it is. There you go, Andrew.
Thank you. So this was part of the presentation. So when I just look at the under district costs, right, we have a line item for general administration, and this has been allocated to the various schools, 211 to Lincoln.
We can't see
205
the screen right now, just so you know. I'm not sure if you're thinking that we're seeing it.
Oh, you're not?
Nope.
Oh, well, I certainly thought you were. Let me try that again. Better?
I think it's on its way. It says that you've started sharing your screen, but okay, there we go. Now we can see it.
Okay, apologies for that. We've got the slow internet connection at the end of the dirt road here in Lincoln. So general administration under district costs, and these numbers were allocated to the various elementary schools, right? 200,000, 205. So that number, when you total it up, is 1.7 million. No, excuse me, it's 1.79 million. Okay, and then I'm gonna close that for you. And then I guess I was just looking, can we see this?
Yep.
Might need to make it a little bigger, Andrew.
Yeah.
Zoom it. On the top left of the document, there's a little zoom button.
Yeah, is that better?
I think it's just a little catch up here with the delay. There we go.
So here I'm just looking in the budget expenditures under general administration, same FY22, the total is 1.7. So all my simple mind is doing is saying, look, there's 1.7 in general administration in the total budget, but somehow we're allocating 90,000 more than that to the elementary schools under general administration, and none appears to be allocated to Mount Abe. So I'm wondering if it might just be helpful to have a breakdown for Mount Abe the way you've done for the elementary schools, and just look into this general administration question. I don't want to take everybody's time now, and we did submit this in our written questions that we had. It's just something we can't really make sense of. Is it somewhat clear what I'm asking, hopefully?
Floyd, do you have clarity on that? I think I have a pretty good sense of it.
Well, I think I know what you're comparing, and the budget expenditure roll up for general administration. If you go back to the previous slides, it doesn't include a lot of other items that are included in this expenditure coded one. And they were just rolled together for simplicity.
Okay, well, I guess that gets back to Herb's point of wanting a clearer breakdown of where all these numbers are coming from, because, it's labeled general administration. There's also facilities costs and special ed administration. I mean, all these categories seem to be consistent with the categories in the bigger general budget. And yet somehow this is 90,000 over that number, and there's no allocation left for Mount Abe. So let's not take any more time on that, but if you could get back to us on that, that would be tremendously helpful.
Yeah, we
And
can
then-
drill into that and get back to you.
Great, thank you. And just my third quick follow-up, in the repurposing plan that you put out, Patrick, there was talk of moving the, stop my sharing here, moving the central offices to Beaman. And we're looking at central office locations and thinking about Beaman and some other places. And I got from the budget, you're paying rent of 71,000 right now for the central office space. I'm assuming there's some other expenses on top of that, and heat, electricity.
I think the 71
various
is a
stuff,
triple
and-
net.
That's the
71
triple net
Okay,
amount.
that's so triple net. Okay, so that's helpful to know. And can you give us a sense of how many discrete office spaces or shared workspaces or, square foot requirements as we look to maybe save that 71,000 or possibly determine that that $71,000 is well spent on those spaces? It would just be helpful to know what your space needs are.
Sure,
And
I
again,
can
if
get
it's
that
better
to
to
you.
get back to us on that.
Yeah, I
that
can
would
get
be
that
fine,
back
but-
to you. And the caveat being, it depends a little bit, right? If we repurpose in a way that squeezes out some folks that currently have offices in elementary schools, that changes the need, like they have to have a home somewhere, so that could change the need. So, but I think I can give you some information to work with.
Okay, and we didn't miss that. Was that included? I know there were some numbers given at one point about the cost of renovating Beaman to accommodate central offices, but
Yeah,
not
we're actually
exactly
still,
sure.
we don't have the numbers for that renovation yet. That's in process. We've been looking at some different designs to try and really get down to some clear figures. But we don't have a cost estimate yet.
So part of what we're thinking, part of our proposal, will attempt to deal with central office needs, and it would be helpful to have central office requirements.
Sure.
Okay.
And we can have a little, it may just take a little back and forth as you're developing your thinking, and we kind of roll with what's the impact on office space in elementary schools that may change the need at central office. So I can give you something to get started. Then we can just stay in touch as your proposal is developing, in case that changes the need at central office.
Well, that's a very kind offer, and I think we will take you up on that. I know there's a lot of questions coming in, and a lot of them have had to go through the board, and just as a group that's put 5 or 6 months into this, and pretty serious about a quality proposal that meets all the educational needs and is also fiscally viable. Some cooperation on that front, greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Andrew, while you were chatting, it gave me a chance to pull up a couple of spreadsheets to be able to answer that question about general administration costs. Other costs that are looped into that, workman's comp, the superintendent, that budget that works around the superintendent is in there, our legal, our audit fees, HRA costs, our insurance costs, items that we can't really upfront allocate direct to a school. We don't know how much HRA cost is going to be at Bristol, for example, or at Mount Abe. So we allocate it in that way. That also doesn't necessarily, the colored sheet breaks those down and puts them in some different places. So there was some inconsistency. I'll take full credit for that. In the attempt to make it brief, it doesn't match up. And you're exactly right. And those are some of the items that aren't in general administration that are in that per pupil cost that came out of some of these other lines that that you can see.
Right.
Does that help?
So maybe if they're just broken out as or other had some different category, just both being called general administration obviously led to the confusion that they were one and the same. And I'll just end it by saying if we could have a similar breakdown as we have for the elementary schools for the high school, so that we can see how those costs are spread out, that would be incredibly helpful as well.
All right, so Steve and then Coco, and I just want to check and see Renee and Herb, your hands are both still up, but I'm not sure if that's just a holdover. So I don't want to not call on you if you have a new question, but I haven't been calling on you because I think they're probably a holdover. So let me know if it's otherwise.
Holdover.
Okay, so Steve, then Coco.
I just wanted to go back to an earlier comment. Somebody was asking what the board, whether the board was considering any other proposals. And Patrick, I thought it might be helpful to touch base on our process with DMG and the fact that we obviously did spend 18 months looking at several other proposals before you made your recommendation. So the DMG conversation might be helpful.
Sure, I can just sort of elaborate on that a little bit. So in efforts to try and help support the board, so in efforts to help support the board going forward, reaching out to a consultant to help both with process, but also potentially bringing some ideas was an interest the board had shared. So I just need to figure out who could be a resource. A year ago. And I reached out to the district management group, well, specifically Nate Levinson, who was sort of a managing partner with the district managing group or district management group. They commissioned a report for the state of Vermont, the legislature, on sort of systems to help particularly struggling learners, but really sort of all learners, thinking about a multi-tiered system of supports and the work needed to do that and build those robust systems. So a really reputable company. They've worked in nearly all 50 states, hundreds of districts, and Nate specifically has done a lot of work with really dozens and dozens of districts working through the challenges of declining enrollment, as much as we're facing. So Nate is going to be working with the board April 13th. Nate's coming for a 2-hour workshop. Nate still has a relationship with DMG, and I'm just sort of learning this. He's starting to kind of go out on his own and do his own thing. So he's just in the early phases of doing that. So still may tie into some of the resources of DMG to help do the work. But he's going to be doing a workshop for the board on April 13th and hearing from the board what the needs are and trying to get a sense of ways in which he can best support the board going forward. So really looking forward to what he'll bring. I think it could range from, and we're still trying to really pin down exactly what that might look like, but it could range from helping the board develop tools to assess proposals, all the way up to the DMG offering some proposals themselves, or Nate offering proposals himself, given the financials. But part of that could also include, this is where the conversation started, a much closer look at my proposal and any others that come through, looking at it from a financial viability standpoint, but also from a sort of programmatic and student outcomes perspective. So that's really exciting. And as Steve mentioned, a couple of falls ago now, when this work was early on in process, there were multiple sessions of hundreds of community members together brainstorming options and possibilities, and that produced, I would say, dozens of ideas that kind of got whittled down to, somewhere around a dozen, that then further got whittled down through more process down to 4 or 5 that we looked much more closely at. And then the board, with all that information, the board directed me to bring forward a recommendation, and that's what happened on December 7th. And predictably, there's strong reactions to my recommendation. That's an idea. There are a lot of ideas, as we've been hearing tonight. And since December 7th, I will point out, and this is great, a lot more people are paying a lot closer attention. So that's a wonderful thing. And now we've just been trying to navigate, okay, so there's a proposal on the table and there's a lot of reaction to that proposal. And how do we navigate hearing more ideas and continuing to engage the community as we pursue something that we feel good will meet student needs and adjust to the realities that we think we're going to face, which even just knowing what the realities are that we're going to face is tricky because there are a lot of moving parts. So that's sort of what brings us to where we are today and a little bit about where we're going from here. And I know the board's going to continue to have conversations about timeline and when decisions get made. And some of that will be impacted by, does this windfall of money from ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 buy us some time or not? And it's continuing to be a very dynamic situation. So I want to, and Coco, I know you're next on the list. I want to apologize. I skipped over Brenda. So Brenda, I want to go to you and then Coco. You're muted right now, Brenda.
God, I was quiet. All I wanted to do was sort of reiterate Andrew's first set of comments or questions. And that is, if we are, a lot of people are discussing leaving the various schools open or closed or whatever based on finances. Could somewhere, either in perhaps in the email that you're sending us, either send us the information on how the expenses are broken down for each school, for example, personnel, building, transportation, and so forth, or send us a source where we can get hold of that easily and where it will be accurate. The other thing is, if you could also include our tuition rates, say for next year for high school students. I don't know if you have one for elementary students, but again, that's just another fact that would be helpful. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Coco?
This is just a process question and kind of goes in line with what Brenda added. Is there going to be a formal and sort of public process for asking questions of the administration? And if so, how would you like those to be submitted? And will the answers that you're going to share, say with Andrew and with other folks who have questions, will those be made public as well to everybody who's interested?
Yeah, so there, I think I have no problem with these questions that people are asking. I think they could benefit more than the question asker. So we could try to put together the responses and send those responses out to the group of folks that are working on the proposals. And then I'd rather folks have information that doesn't necessarily fit with what they're working on for a proposal than not have information that could be influential. So we can put all responses out to the group. Certainly based on what's been asked tonight, I guess that's a question for the group. The number of people I include doesn't necessarily change the amount of work in responding to questions. So, you know, if for example, Andrew has a follow-up question specifically about something, would the group want me to send that question and its response back out to the entire group and do that for every question that comes back and forth, however big or small?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I'm all in. So I would like as much information as possible. And whether you decide to have a document that people can continually refer to that's updated, or you do it on an email, that's I guess up to you and the group. But
that is the beauty of Google Documents, is they're always live. So you always have access to the most up-to-date information. So that could be a great way to go.
And then Patrick, I just had one question, and I haven't, you know, in sort of recent weeks gone back and looked at the December 7th proposal that you made, but have you revisited those financial projections from December based on the sort of new information on the Ed Fund and what the revenues look like at the state? Has that been updated?
No, and it hasn't been updated to include the FY22. So that was everything. And that's, so one of the hardest things with all the financials is financials don't stay still for very long. So trying to help everyone keep their head on straight, we sort of picked a point in time financially and tried to stick with that for as long as we could to try and keep some of those numbers as still as possible, when in reality, they've been moving the whole time. And so I haven't gone back to update the financials relative to that presentation. But I
Yeah,
think
I
that would
think
be important, you know, as we approach the time when the board needs to make a comparison of all these different options, they're going to need to have much like it was, it might have been Nate earlier that was saying the importance of working from same assumptions. So I'm going to have to update a lot of the assumptions that were in that December 7th proposal.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that will be really important for the board and the community to be working with the information on the Ed Fund right now, because it is a distinctly different picture than it was at the end of 2020. So thanks. That's all I have.
All right, Nancy, then Steve, and Herb. Is that a new hand up now?
I do.
Okay, so we'll go Nancy, Steve, Herb.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask, I think it's true that the board hasn't decided whether to engage the district management group yet. That's something that they'll be mulling over after the presentation in April.
Right, so they've decided to work with Nate in April on that meeting specifically, and beyond that, there's still.
Beyond that, there's been no decision.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Steve?
Yeah, Patrick, I was just thinking about your responses to questions and wondering if we couldn't reconstitute the FAQ thing on the website.
Yep.
Only because that's a very public place where anybody can find it. It doesn't have to be shared amongst a group. It can be just shared publicly and everybody can see it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Herb, then Krista?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Just following up on Coco's suggestion, and I didn't quite catch exactly what you were saying about updating the district's proposal there, Patrick. It didn't. I wasn't clear whether that would be available as people are putting together their proposals or afterwards, because I think, you know, I would suggest that it be available before people submit their proposals on the 4th, because, you know, in a big picture, the district has proposed, made a proposal, very, you know, so other proposals are going to need to compare themselves to that in some manner. So if we're still working with, if we're working with outdated numbers and data, it really won't quite be a fair comparison, or it won't be a fair way to present the proposals. I have one other question, and that is in terms of submitting other questions. I mean, people, I think, have a lot of different questions. You know, I've tried to touch on some of the major points, but, you know, I have some other questions, and I just want to make sure, Patrick and Floyd, that you'll be amenable to answering those so that we can put together our proposals. Most of them are just clarifying questions, or, where is this data in the multitude of documents you submitted over the past year?
Yeah, I think certainly amenable. The reality check is the hard part, right? Again, we didn't hire multiple other FTEs to either respond to questions or to run the district while we respond to questions. So it's a tricky balancing act to be responsive to what at times is a significant number of questions, and there have been individual questions that alone require multiple days of work to respond to. So it's really just been an interest in being responsive and not being dismissive of all the other responsibilities we have along the way. So we're going to have to just continue to try and thread that needle as we try to support everyone.
That, Patrick. You know, let me give you an example. You know, what are the enrollment numbers by grade, by town, you know, in the past 10 years and the next 10 years? Is that something that would be beyond your capability, resource-wise, to be able to answer?
No, some of that we have, and some of that we would need to pull together. And I think the by grade, by school gets a little trickier. You know, we have the NESDEC study that provides the bigger picture, but I recognize the school by school and grade by grade is important as people are thinking about configuration. So I've started some of that work already. So in anticipation of that question. So yeah, I think that's
Okay, we'll see what happens. We'll submit our questions and you'll provide us what you want to provide us. Okay.
Krista?
Yeah, I mean, I want to see that question asking process be successful and not be a process that leads to frustration on the part of proposal submitters or being overwhelmed on the part of our administrators. And so I think we have to all give each other a little grace and latitude with that, or I'd like to ask that of everyone. Well, what I'm wondering and what struck me at the beginning of this meeting, which was so powerful to me, is that this is just so great that all of you folks that are thinking about this are all together. And I think a lot of the questions are shared among many of you and overlap. And so I'm imagining, and this might not be the most effective way, but one approach could be in the email that Patrick shares out with everyone's contact info, perhaps he could put in a blank, sort of question spreadsheet where folks could put in their questions, but that we might ask that you first see if there are any that are really similar to something posed by somebody else, or if there's a way to kind of prioritize those. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out a way so that we remove this idea that people are trying to withhold information or that folks are feeling questions are not answered, but to also just recognize that, we want this to be a successful process for everyone. And we also need to be mindful of making it somewhat efficient.
Nancy?
It occurs to me that many of the questions have the answers. You've already created the documents and given them out at different times, Floyd and Patrick. And I wonder if there's a way to just pull the links together in some categories so that because so many of the questions you have the documentation for already. You presented at different times. And for those of us who aren't there, it's the pulling all of that together that's really tough for us because we don't always know where to look.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and I think the board has done a good job, or somebody at the administration, probably Jennifer, helped to reorganize the website a little bit. And I think that's been very helpful to gather some of those documents that you had to go through agendas or meeting minutes before to track down. And I think the more of those things that could appear in that same format on the website, the more helpful that would be.
Okay, so we're at 8:25. We didn't explicitly move into agenda items about what other data or information would be helpful or how can we provide ongoing support, but I'm pretty sure we covered those two questions in our discussion tonight. But I'll certainly leave a moment here for anyone to jump in if they have thoughts they haven't shared around those two questions. And I guess for me, as people are thinking about it, the takeaway that I hope everyone gets from tonight is we really are in pursuit of the same thing. Different ideas about how to get there, different beliefs about what our realities will be with our ever-changing targets. But we really are in pursuit of the same thing. And it's important to me that people here understand that Floyd, myself, our team, the board, we're really interested in helping to support these concepts move forward and provide the information we can and have the realities of the resources that we have available to provide those answers. And it does get frustrating sometimes on both the receiving end of the questions and the receiving end of the information. It's through no reason other than capacity. So as Krista said, I do think we have to just work with one another as we try to do the best we can with what we have as we pursue these common goals of improving outcomes for our students. So, and you wouldn't all be here at this meeting, and I see a lot of familiar faces that have been at a lot of meetings recently. You wouldn't be engaged in this to the level that you are if you didn't feel the same way. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time that you've invested to date, and thank you for the time that you'll invest in the future. I don't know what the solution's going to be, but if we can stay in it together, I can't imagine it's anything but a great solution. So with that, I guess if there are any last questions, I think we can adjourn. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone. Really appreciate your time and energy. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Patrick.
Bye. Thanks, Floyd.
Thank you, Floyd. Patrick.
You're welcome. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for being here.